It's a Friday in 1973, and a man sits down at a Las Vegas blackjack table. The money in front of him isn't his. It's the last $5,000 his company has left in the entire world. And he's about to bet all of it on the turn of a card. Because in 3 days, on Monday morning, he owes a fuel bill he can't pay. No fuel, no flights, no company. And every person who works for him is out of a job. So, this is it. A CEO gambling his company's final dollars at a casino table. And somehow, this is the night that saved FedEx. But I need you to hold one question in your head for the next 10 minutes. Was this man a genius? Or just the luckiest gambler who ever lived? Because the answer is not what you think. And to even understand how he ended up at that table, you have to rewind to a classroom where a professor read this exact business idea, picked up a red pen, and gave him a C. He wrote, basically, that it would never work. So, keep score as we go, the professor or the gambler. Who was right? His name was Frederick Wallace Smith, and from day one, the odds were against him. When Fred was 4 years old, his father died, and for the next several years, his own body was trying to take him down too. Fred was crippled by a bone disease as a kid. He couldn't run. He could barely walk. He spent those years dragging himself around on crutches and heavy leg braces while the other kids ran past him. And of course, they bullied him for it. So picture this boy. No dad, stuck on crutches, an easy target every single day. But here's the first thing you'll notice about Fred Smith. By the age of 10, he beat the disease and walked on his own. And the instant he was free, he became obsessed with one thing: flying. As a teenager, the kid who couldn't walk a few years earlier was flying airplanes. He even co-founded a recording studio with his friends, one that's still running to this day. So watch the pattern, because it never stops repeating. Tell Fred Smith something is impossible, and that's the exact moment he locks in. That obsession took him to Yale to study economics, and around 1965, he sat down to write a term paper that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He'd noticed something everyone lived with but nobody had fixed. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Back then, if you needed to send something urgent across the country, you were stuck. Your package rode in the belly of a regular passenger flight. So your medicine, your legal documents, your spare part, they only went where the passengers were going. Slow, unreliable, completely at the mercy of someone else's schedule. So Fred wrote down a radical fix. What if one company flew its own fleet of cargo jets? What if they flew at night through empty skies and funneled every package through a single central hub? Sort them all in the dark, then fly them back out and deliver by truck at dawn. Anything, anywhere, overnight. It was years ahead of its time. Fred was proud of it. And as the legend goes, his professor handed it back with a C. The idea was interesting, but unfeasible. It would never work in the real world. Now, years later, Fred said he didn't even remember getting that grade. So maybe the C is a myth. But the doubt was absolutely real, and almost everyone agreed with the professor. Everyone except Fred. He was certain they were all wrong. He just didn't know yet that it would take a war to give him the chance to prove it. And that war nearly killed him. Fred graduated in 1966 and went straight into the Vietnam War. He served 2 tours as a Marine officer, calling in airstrikes from the ground. This was about as dangerous as the war got. He came home with a Silver Star, a Bronze Star, and 2 Purple Hearts. But in the middle of all that, Fred couldn't stop noticing one thing. The military was terrible at moving supplies. Everything crawled through a tangled mess of stops to reach the front. And every day he watched it and thought, I already know how to fix this. Then there's the second thing he picked up over there. In the downtime between operations, Fred played blackjack. constantly, and he got dangerously good at it. He learned to read the table. He learned to feel the exact moment the odds quietly tipped in his favor. To everyone else, it was just a way to kill time in a war zone. But lock that detail away, because in a few years, a blackjack table is going to decide whether thousands of people keep their jobs. Fred came home in 1969, sick of destroying things. Desperate to build something, he took over an aviation company and instantly hit the same wall as everyone else. Shipping aircraft parts across the country took forever. And there it was again. The idea from that paper, screaming to be built. So, in 1971, Fred finally went all in and founded Federal Express Cargo Planes. One central hub, overnight delivery, the whole vision from the paper. But to actually launch it, he needed a fleet of jets. And that is a staggering amount of money. First, Fred poured in millions from his own family inheritance. Then he pitched investors, who were floored by how deeply he understood the industry. And by the end of 1972, he had raised around $91 million. For the era, it was one of the largest startup fundraisers anyone had ever seen. He set up the hub in Memphis, dead center in the country, and in 1973, after a decade of doubt, Federal Express finally flew. 14 jets, 186 packages, 25 cities. In a single night, the idea everyone called impossible was now real and airborne and working. This was Fred's moment. The professor was wrong. The doubters were wrong. He'd done it after everything. The braces, the bullying, the war, he was finally winning. And that is exactly when it all started to collapse. Just as Federal Express took off, the 1973 oil crisis hit. Tensions in the Middle East triggered an oil embargo against the United States. And almost overnight, fuel prices quadrupled. Now stop and think about what Fred's whole company actually was. 14 jets, burning fuel every single night. The one thing his business needed most had just become brutally, impossibly expensive. His costs exploded, and in those early months, Federal Express bled close to $29 million. Investors looked at the fire and refused to throw in another dollar. So Fred got desperate, and this is where it gets almost hard to believe. He begged his own employees to hold their paychecks and not cash them, just to keep the doors open. His crews fueled the planes on their personal credit cards, hoping to be paid back someday. Fred stopped taking any salary at all because there was nothing left to take, and it still wasn't enough. The company burned through a third of its cash in a matter of months until it came down to one impossible weekend. $5,000 in the bank, a $24,000 fuel bill, due Monday. It was Friday afternoon, and there was no money and no plan. Fred had one last lifeline, a giant called General Dynamics, one investment from them, and the company survives. He put on his best suit and made the pitch of his life, and they turned him down flat. So, now Fred is sitting in an airport waiting on a flight back to Memphis, and he's doing the math no founder ever wants to do. Hundreds of people about to lose their jobs because of him. A dream, dead, and every single doubter finally proven right. He imagined walking into the office Monday and admitting it was over. For a moment, he was completely defeated. And then something flipped. He started giving himself a talk. This was the kid who beat a disease that should have crippled him for life. This was the boy who was flying planes before he could legally drink. This was the Marine who survived 2 tours and came home decorated for it. And right there, in that lounge, he made the decision that became a legend. If the banks wouldn't give him the money to save his company, he would go and win it himself. They called his flight to Memphis, and Fred didn't get on it. Instead, he pulled out the company's final $5,000, and he booked a flight to Las Vegas. His logic was insane, but it was logic. Without that fuel bill paid, the company was dead anyway. So what exactly did he have to lose? Fred walked straight to the blackjack tables, and now Vietnam comes roaring back. Back then, some tables still ran on a single deck of cards, which meant a man who'd learned to track every card had a real quiet edge, and Fred had learned to track every card. But an edge only tilts the odds. It guarantees nothing. And this wasn't pocket change on the felt. It was his company, his dream, and the livelihood of everyone who trusted him. So, Fred played hand after hand, his stacks swinging up and down all weekend. Win a few, lose a few. His nerves stretched to the snapping point, but slowly, the odds he'd learned to read in a war zone started to pay him back. And by Sunday, Fred Smith had won $27,090 against a $24,000 bill, enough to pay it, enough to keep the planes flying for one more week. So he cashed out, wired the money home, and flew back to Memphis. His team could not believe he'd gambled their last dollars at a casino, but it had bought him the one thing money usually can't time. And here's the twist almost everyone misses about this story. The Vegas money did not save FedEx $27,000 against a company losing millions. On its own, that was never going to be enough. What that weekend actually bought was just enough runway for Fred to land real money. Soon after, he pulled in around $11 million in fresh funding. And within a couple of years, the company that kept nearly dying finally started turning a profit. But now watch what Fred does next, because this is the real answer to our question. Through that brutal decade, every other shipping company played it safe, cutting costs to survive. Fred did the exact opposite. He poured money into massive advertising and chased the smaller cities the big airlines ignored. While everyone else hid, the gambler doubled down, and it worked. Then he placed his biggest bet of all. By law, carriers like FedEx were trapped flying tiny planes with tiny loads. So, Fred spent years lobbying Washington to change the law itself. And in the late 1970s, the government deregulated air cargo and lifted the cap. Now Fred could fly to his biggest planes money could buy. In 1978, FedEx went public, and the company that almost died over a $24,000 build detonated into a giant every single bet, paying off at once. By 1983, FedEx blew past $1 billion in sales. It went global. It let you track your own package online before almost anyone else could. It became the #1 overnight delivery service on the planet. Today, it runs one of the largest cargo airlines in the world. Fred Smith led that company for more than 50 years. He passed away in 2025, remembered as one of the greatest entrepreneurs America ever produced. He left behind a network that moves millions of packages every single night. All of it grew out of one idea. The same idea a professor supposedly read, circled in red, and called impossible. So, genius or just luck? Here's the truth I promised you at the start. The Vegas gamble was never really the gamble. The real gamble was a kid in leg braces betting he'd fly, a college student betting the experts were wrong, a broke founder betting on himself when every bank in America had already said no. Vegas was just the one bet where you could finally see the cards on the table. That idea that supposedly earned a C, it became one of the most valuable companies on earth. So the riskiest thing Fred Smith ever did wasn't betting $5,000 at a blackjack table. It was refusing for his entire life to believe the people who told him he'd already lost. And if betting your whole company in Vegas sounds crazy, wait until you see how two guys selling shoes out of a car trunk built Nike. That story's right here. I'll see you there in a second.